From the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum in the heart of Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home in what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we're turning our spotlight on music copyist and local historian, Don Rice. Don has made a distinguished career as a music copyist on and off Broadway and well beyond. Starting as far back as 1992 with Miller Music Service, his projects have included Jelly's Last Jam, Beauty and the Beast, The Producers, and Wicked. With his own company of Annexer Rice Music Service, he has worked on Jersey Boys, The Little Mermaid, Frozen, and many other theater, film, and television productions. In addition, Don is a local historian for the Inwood community. He serves as president of the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance and, along with Cole Thompson, co-hosted in pre-pandemic times a monthly Lost Inwood history series in the neighborhood, which evolved into a book called Lost Inwood. We're going to talk about that, his work, and so much more. But first, Don, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to be here.
It's really great to see you in person. How are you and your family doing?
Hanging in there. Now that spring is coming, things are looking up, and as more people get the vaccine, I have high hopes for by the end of the year we'll be, I don't know about back to normal, but close to it.
It'll feel a lot better, right?
Yeah.
Well, we hope so too. And as far as normal for our industry, it's been anything but normal.
Yeah.
Don and I were just talking before we got on air here, is that we just recently celebrated a year of closing from Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater as we know it, live performance in general, has been on pause for over a year.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see what it's going to be like coming back, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, especially the New York work.
Absolutely.
How is that going to restart? Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully everyone will be able to work together and we can phase in a production at a time before it goes all gangbusters.
I haven't heard about how it's going to go yet or what the plans are.
Yeah. I've only spoken to a few general managers and obviously everyone wants their show to be up and back or the ones they had in the pipeline to be out first.
Yeah.
I even saw some commercials the other day for Six, the new musical about Henry VIII wives, trying to gain some momentum again.
Is June 1st still what they're looking at?
The Broadway League still says June 1st. As far as what's possible, I believe what's feasible that everyone is kind of collectively agreeing behind closed doors is that September seems more feasible for the earliest productions, and then some producers have come out and said 2022. They're just saying we're going to be back then.
Yeah.
And I think a staggered approach is important because at the end of the day, everyone's competing for the same audience, and tourism is a big part of that audience and coming back, which affects your work as a music copyist for Broadway musicals for sure. But Don, let's start talking about your career as a music copyist, if you don't mind. For the uninitiated, or just for those who don't work in the world of creating musicals from the ground up, can you share with our listeners what does a music copyist do?
Yeah, it's a very old profession. Not the oldest profession, but it is among the older music professions in that as long as there have been composers who've written on paper, there have been people who have assisted as editors and as taking the work off the back of the composer so that the composer can compose, the creative people. So I've read articles about Beethoven's music copyists and what he liked about each one. People even know their names, some of them. What is it that they do is that I work with a composer, but more frequently an orchestrator and a music director. And I'm the music craftsman who prepares sheet music for the band in the pit. And so we'll take a score, the orchestrator will provide a score after the songwriter provides the song, and And then we need parts for the orchestra. And so the person who extracts the parts, writes them out line by line, and uses all of the common practices that help a music instrumentalist play their music without stopping, without raising their hands with questions, without adding in any of my own mistakes. That's the copyist. I'm like the music printer and the music extraction person.
And can you speak to where during the production period your work begins?
I'm always pre-production, almost. And so where that comes from, let's see. Usually, well, the songs are usually written before. Actually, there's a lot of the beginnings of a show that I'm not even aware of. I'm always coming in at a certain place, and that is often around when the cast starts to rehearse. So that's 4 to 6 weeks before the first preview, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so that's when they actually are all in a room with the director, with the choreographer, and with a piano player and a drummer, and they are working out the arrangements of each song. There's also a music department member called the arranger. And so the songs might be stretched. We'll add another verse. This one's going to have a dance. This one will have an intro. And they work out the structure of all of these songs. And once they get it all hammered out, they have a piano part with a vocal. And that they can hand to an orchestrator who will bring the whole thing into 3 dimensions. It will go beyond the rehearsal room of a piano and a drummer. And suddenly there'll be 20 musicians, if you're lucky, 15 musicians.
We aren't recording live on Broadway, folks.
That's at least a 3-piece band there driving by. 1, 2, depending on the number of sirens. But that's the coloration. And so the orchestrator will color it depending on the emotion that's needed at the moment or the cue that's needed at the moment. There could be a dance, ding, in the middle of a dance to synchronize the band with emotion on stage or with a lighting cue or with some other effect. And so the orchestrator brings the color to the song that the composer and the director and choreographer all want. And then once that's done, a score has been created. And then it gets delivered to me. So the bulk of my job is, the first half of my job is before the first preview. They try to get most of the show done before then. So a lot of times, maybe not so often, underscores and sort of connective passages might wait till the end, or the bows might be choreographed later during previews. And so then the second part of my job is during previews, when things change. So they've rehearsed in a room. They think the song's going to go great. They've released it to the orchestrator, and I make the parts. Now they get it in front of a live audience, and the audience has reactions that then they're going to tailor their songs to perhaps maybe work out a better angle. They want a better ending, or they can't hear this part because the audience is applauding. And so then they'll make changes. And during previews, that's when the high pressure part of my job happens, in that you get a change in the middle of the afternoon, and they want to try it that night. And so the turnaround time goes down to next to nothing, and you have to really be quick on your feet.
And how many parts sometimes does that take in that turnaround time? Like sometimes you're working on, it's not just the woodwinds, right? It's for a variety of parts for that entire section.
Yeah, they might have cut a few measures. When I talk about a measure, that's 4 counts of music, typically, 1, 2, 3, 4. They might just say, well, it's too short. We need to just cut a couple measures. Okay, so we'll do that for tonight. And if the orchestrator needs to adjust it, they'll dictate some changes, and we'll go as fast as we can. It could be that they work on 5 songs that day, and some of them don't affect us because they're book dialogue scenes. They've changed the dialogue. We never know about that. But if they've changed the music, we do know about that because it has to be right every night. And then we become part of the keeping the show exactly as it should be every night, as it changes during previews.
And it's funny, then sometimes in previews you're asked to add more music for reasons you would never fathom. For instance, you find things out like perhaps a scene change needs to happen, and it's taking longer than perhaps the director initially expected to do, and so asks for music to the composer, if the composer's still alive, the composer's even still there,
Yeah.
say, can we have something more to
Yeah.
use?
I'm doing that with Frozen right now. There are two touring versions of certain songs because of the scenery, because of the set. What do you know about love? Is number 9 in Frozen. And on the U.S. tour, the set, which is an ice bridge, is a certain size. And so the action takes place on that set. And so the song has to fit the action, the length of the song. So they have a version for that piece of set. And then the Broadway stage had a larger ice bridge. And I think they're going to use that in Tokyo. So the Tokyo or Broadway version is a different version of the song, not because the emotional things in the song are different, but because the set is different.
Something you would never have thought of.
So the song is 10 or 15 seconds longer or something like that, but it is really precise because the action has to fit the music. And if the action takes place on a bigger set, the music has to accommodate it.
Pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
People never think about that when they're reading a score.
You wouldn't know it listening.
And wondering,
Yeah.
why is this song so long?
Yeah, you wouldn't know it listening to it because the arrangements fit. The emotions are still right for everything.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So once you're in the previews and once opening night hits, people think the job is done at opening night. That's not really the case when it comes to music copyists, is it, Don? What happens? The work continues well past opening night, sometimes even well past many closing performances in some circumstances, doesn't it?
Well, it all depends on the production, and that does change from job to job. The more successful the show, the more what you said is true. There might be an arrangement for the Tony Awards broadcast if the production is featured on one of their things on stage. They might do a cast album, in which case the music has to be tailored to actually have beginnings and endings, or however they want the concept of that cast album to go. They could go on Good Morning America, and they need an arrangement for that. So there's like little additional jobs that happen, and the more successful, they go into promotion, more related to promotion, television ads or mostly radio jingles. They'll need some music for that. Mm-hmm. And then different actors come in after 6 months or a year, and they sing in slightly different keys. Not all of them sing in exactly the same keys from opening night. So then you need to move your song up to a slightly higher key or down to a slightly lower key, depending on whether or not they reach the upper or lower comfortable limit of their ranges. So sometimes, like on Beauty and the Beast, there were a couple of songs that had to be done in several keys. Same with Wicked. Trying to think of the songs. I mean, Defying Gravity. I don't know which songs had a lot, but you look at them and you think, wow, we've got like 2 or 3 or 4, even 4 keys for this particular song.
It's pretty amazing.
Or in case of Wicked, does the wizard dance well or not? And if there's choreography, if the actor who plays the wizard, at least at the beginning, there's choreography for the dance part of a certain song, but then other versions didn't have as long a dance break.
Pretty
so it's tailored to the skills of the person who's performing.
That's why live theater, you never know what you're going to get, and it's pretty interesting, and it all affects everything else, casting, everything else. You're looking for certain people who can do certain things, and some people wonder why, like, well, I'm right for that role. I could play that role too. Well, there's no question you could play the role, but sometimes there's factors as what you're describing is important for the specific role, because if they can't dance, or that affects a lot happening for a lot of different people on the production.
Yeah. Play to the strengths.
Yep, absolutely. So, Don, when you were a kid, or whenever you saw your first musical, what was your first musical you saw? Do you remember?
Yeah, I saw an Oliver Twist when I was about 5. Not on Broadway. I was living in Chicago when I saw it. I remember being amazed because it had a rotating stage, and so there was a chase scene somewhere in Act 2 where everybody's running, but it's the thing that's rotating. But they go through rooms and stuff. It seemed like they were running down the block, and that's what I remember most.
Did you picture yourself like being the Artful Dodger after that production, or
No, not really. But when was it? In 8th grade, somebody persuaded me to try out for a play, and so I did. And it was Oliver.
Was it really? You just put 2 and 2 together, didn't you?
How about that?
You're welcome, Don. This is better than therapy, right?
What was the character, though?
Bill Sykes? Because you're a tall guy like me.
Yeah, that's who it was.
Was it?
Yeah.
I figured. But they'd make me play too, probably. I would never pass for a little orphan anywhere, unfortunately. But it's a great role. So I'm curious, when you got that role as Bill Sykes and afterwards, I would say people usually picture themselves playing a role when they see theater for the first time, or when they go out to be part of a production, or maybe even playing in the pit if they're musicians. But rarely, I think people think about working backstage or directing, or I think it'd be highly unusual for someone to be inspired to become a music copyist as their first foray into theater. So I'm curious and very intrigued how you found your path as a copyist and how it led to working at arguably the highest level of your industry.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Chance played a big part in it. But what happened was I was a saxophone player and a saxophone major in music. I have a music conservatory degree. And so I had played so many, classical pieces of music, and then big band. Being a saxophone player, you play a lot of big band and jazz pieces, and you're sight reading, and I'm a good sight reader. And so I would notice on some songs that I would get lost more than other songs, and you wonder, well, why am I getting lost? It's a solo. I'm supposed to be playing, but I'm getting lost. And I started to realize that the sheet music itself could help me or hinder me in in keeping up together with the music, or it could lose me. After college, I eventually ended up on cruise ships, where I was playing in a band on a cruise ship, and then was a band leader for a while. And that's where I started being a music copyist, inadvertently, because I was arranging music for the band and for entertainers who were coming through the ship. It was Carnival Cruise Line. So a magician would come, and he would hire me to write some song for them, for the band, for some act of his, or for our singers, particularly the singers, would hire me to arrange songs that they wanted to sing in front of their cruise ship weekly schedule. So they took these charts with them and distributed them, and we would play them. And as I started to write my own parts, I realized, A, my handwriting is really bad. And B, I saw advertisements for computer music notation software that was coming out. This is 1988. So the Macintosh was only 3 or 4 years old. And I had used the PC so briefly, and the whole graphical interface of the computer was just being developed. So from Grand Cayman Island, I made a payphone call to a place in Minnesota, and I bought some music notation software called Finale. This is in December or November of 1988, right when it came out. And I learned it, and I went in with the cruise director to an Apple store, and we bought some Macintoshes. I had saved my money. These things could do nothing, and they cost a fortune, but it could do just enough. And I learned how to use the software on my own, because we were just going around our weekly thing, Jamaica every week, and Grand Cayman every week, and Cozumel every week. And I'm writing music for the band to play. And then the entertainers hear that music, and they say, can you write something for me? And the computer parts, I would get off the ship at St. Thomas every week and use their inkjet printer or their laser printer at a print service in the port. And then we would have our music to play. And it looked so much better than my own handwriting. And people loved that because it looked like it came out of a published book. And the entertainers in particular loved that. So they started hiring me to write music for them and paying me to do it. So when I was getting ready to leave the ship, and you're thinking, what are your options if you're not going to be a saxophone player on a cruise ship anymore? Now you have to really fend for yourself on land. I thought if I moved to New York, I could be a saxophone player, or I could be an arranger, or orchestrate for entertainers or whatever, or I can always provide the sheet music because I know how to operate the software. So who's going to call me for what? And that's how it sort of ended up being it, because I got more phone calls for being a music copyist, because Broadway was just getting to the point of making the transition between fountain pen. Music copyists used fountain pens for hundreds of years, and some still do. But Beethoven's copyists used a fountain pen or a quill, and up until the 1990s, Broadway used them. As a matter of fact, all professional commercial music was done by hand.
Well, do you have any favorite songs from musicals that you've worked on that have been cut completely and that you've wished they've kept them in?
I don't think that way. I don't know if I'm a mercenary or just not so...
You're clinical. You're clinical in your work.
It's my job, and I'm a professional about it, and I try not to get emotionally involved with it. There are plenty of songs that were cool. I was just thinking about one this morning. Da 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 da. See, I could remember it. It was the original opening number of The Goodbye Girl, and they performed it 3 or 4 times. I remember being backstage, the first preview with Peter Miller. This is in Chicago, '92, I think. They made it through the first performance. I don't think they had to stop. We see Marvin Hamlish backstage. Peter says, "So Marvin, does that mean we can go home?" And Marvin says, "Pack your bags, you're out of here. We're done." And then the next day, Peter Miller, whose job it was, calls Marvin and says, "Okay, so about those tickets." And Marvin says, "You're not going anywhere until I tell you to." And we were there for like another month because they replaced that song. And they were, but I still remember it. I think that song is still part of the exit music. It might be parts of it on the cast album, but
Gotcha.
there's no singing anymore.
Amazing.
And if I were to think about it, there are going to be others like that too. But that's what comes up right now.
I just think it's so fascinating that you have this. For those who work on a production, I think that I agree. You have to keep a professional composure, and you're there to do a job and keep the story moving forward for everyone. But the fact that we do work in theater, part of it is yes, it is a job, of course. But two is that there is an emotional connection. Sometimes you end up hearing you hear an earworm that gets to you, and then when it's not there anymore, you're like, you kind of miss that.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic that you're able to, the composers do hide little pieces of snippets of some things elsewhere, and they recur. Perhaps in exit music, perhaps in interludes between scene changes, perhaps in bridges of songs. They end up creating new bridges for things.
Oh, sometimes the songs are so great. There was a song cut in the Act 2 of Frozen. That was it. They performed it in Denver, but they didn't perform it on Broadway. It was gone by the time it opened on Broadway. But it was such a good tune, swinging. I think they put it on as a bonus track of the cast album.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, we're going to switch gears here.
Yeah.
To your alternative life as a local historian.
Yeah.
For the record, you were not born in Inwood.
No.
Correct? So what was it about the neighborhood that drew you in?
I remember walking one day, and I ended up in Inwood Park. I walked from Cabrini, and I ended up here, and I remember thinking, what is this neighborhood? The air seemed different. I had a visceral reaction to my first time in Inwood. And so then I really thought, this could be a good place. I wonder what it's like to live here. So I walked into Rob Kleinbart's office, and since I didn't know really where I was or anything, he was asking me for information. I didn't want to give my name or anything, because where am I really? I don't even know. But it felt right. And so then we started to look up here, and we eventually found a place. And that was more than 20 years ago. 1999.
And then how do you go from just loving the neighborhood and feeling it special to becoming kind of a spokesperson for it?
We recently moved into our apartment. The co-op was going to try and put some photos up on the wall of the lobby so that it would be less dreary looking, look nice. And they invited people to come out and see these old historic photos that they had found to put up in the lobbies. And, I'm just a few months in the neighborhood and I don't know anything about the history. But when I'm looking at these photos, I thought they were cool. And I kind of thought, how did they find them? So the internet is in its infancy. It's 1999. But I tried my luck and I've ended up at the Library of Congress and I found another photo of Inwood. And it was back in the days when Scavengers was open. Yeah. And someone at Scavengers was a guy. Leela, somebody must have been Guy because he was a photo editor or a photo department person. And I told him that I had found some image and he liked it and it went up and they got a copy and it went up in a lobby somewhere. And that gave me that positive feedback that I needed, thinking, wow, I can do this on our neighborhood. I could research our neighborhood. I'm so curious about so many things. And so then as the internet and institutional digitizing started to gain traction, there would be more and more. And then eBay, of course, people are selling stuff, and that's another way to research. You don't have to buy stuff. You can look at the pictures. They're really serving them up, and you can use search keywords to find stuff. And that's how I met Jason Minter, who was also interested in Inwood history. And so Jason and I started going. We would go up to the Kingsbridge Historical Society. We would collect this or that and trade notes. So that when he opened his Indian Road Cafe, he said, Don, we should do a history thing. Do you think that that's a possible thing? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know if I could do it on my own.
It's a lot.
So we did try one on my own. And Cole was there, and he came up to me afterwards and offered great suggestions. And I said, you want to do it together? So that's how it happened. And so he's equally good at research. And he has really become an expert presenter. And so, it's just really a lot of fun to listen to him, what he's discovered. I learn stuff all the time. So between the two of us, we were able to keep it going. And so it's like 1 month of diving deep and another month of getting it ready. And it sort of it took on a life of its own.
Well, I love one of the tales you've told, and perhaps some people can find these pieces on eBay every once in a while. The Inwood pottery, which was a movement because there was an Inwood pottery studio.
Yeah.
Just hidden into Inwood Hill Park. Yeah. It was a residence, working kiln and art studio that was functioning in Inwood Hill Park.
Year-to-year lease with the Parks Department, yeah.
And that's just, to me, it's a thrilling piece of history that, before things got so bureaucratically divided up, people did live in the woods. People did have residences all over. There are Indian caves there. Well before us, Lenape. Yeah. Not to go too far of a deep dive into the history of it all, but it's I like that part. It's not so long ago where you could just walk into the woods and happen upon someone's house, and find what they're about and how this particular Inwood Pottery Studio, was a connection to that culture. Yeah.
They taught lessons. I believe that there are still people alive who took lessons at the Inwood Pottery Studio. They were kicked out in the 30s by Robert Moses when the park was renovated and baseball fields were built and things like that. So there was just a whole different. But I think that it is amazing because people are alive who would still remember the Inwood pottery.
Yeah, and also there's. On the other side of the neighborhood, towards the Harlem River, there was the Dyckman Oval.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm curious if you could tell listeners, without giving the complete seminar, but it was the home to the New York Cubans,
Yep.
New York Cubans, and other large events. I mean, it's amazing to think one time we had a ginormous sports stadium in northern Manhattan.
Yeah. This is right at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, too, so around 1920-ish. And so the stadium was built in 1917, and because it was independently run, the people who did the bookings there could book any team they wanted. And so traveling black teams who were looking for inroads into the New York market could book their games there. And so the very first Negro National League, formed in 1920, I believe, or Rube Foster was the guy behind that. And his teams came to the Dyckman Oval. This is in the late teens, early 20s, and put Inwood on the map. It was like where people from Harlem would come. There were other stadiums, of course, but this was one of the stadiums where people would come to see their games. And then a second sort of iteration of it happened in the 30s with Alex Pompez and his New York Cubans team, which sort of, he was a guy who sort of began and created the pipeline of Latin American players into eventually the major leagues. Guys in the Hall of Fame, and his team was playing at the Dyckman Oval.
It's pretty amazing to know that we have such a rich history in the neighborhood, and I personally thank you and Cole and all those who have documented this because I think it has made our lives more enriched, and I for one think that there's no greater gift than knowledge to pass on. So I appreciate both of your creativity and ingenuity in creating your talks and sharing your passion with our community and our honor listeners here at Inwood Artworks.
People always ask us, not always, how do you keep coming up with new things? Why don't you run out? Haven't you talked about everything? There's no way, because it's like a play. All right, let's use a theater analogy. If you know a play well, then it reveals itself even more to you. Like Shakespeare, people can spend their lives studying Shakespeare. And if you go to say Shakespeare play the first time, you might not even understand all the words you're hearing. And so you get it on the surface, but you don't get it deep. And so the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know, and so then you can learn about that, or it reveals itself to you. And so there's never an ending.
Well, does that mean you're going to continue to bring back Lost Inwood and history presentations post-pandemic?
Yeah, I hope so. We'll find out.
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to stop researching stuff. I've got like 5 topics going right now.
Wow. Any particular ones you want to share that you're working on?
Well, I am working on the Dyckman Oval topic, and I've given it a couple of times at the New York Adventure Club, and I'm going to be giving it in April for the SABRE people, the Society of American Baseball Research. And the Dyckman Farmhouse has been trying to do a lot of research about the enslaved in North Manhattan. So there are different topics about that I'm working on. Following paper trails, we're working on the 212th Street Cemetery for the enslaved. And so I have a keynote going about that. There's also just trying to find information, and there was a talk just last Wednesday that the Dyckman House sponsored about it, about the actual enslaved in the Dyckman family. And so I'm also working on things related to that, maybe not just the Dyckman family, but about North Manhattan in particular. So there's that, and can I say one more?
Yeah.
Okay. About 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall, you can go up into Inwood Hill Park when there's not a lot of poison ivy, and you can find the old remnants of the old houses and things that were up there. And that has been a super long-term project of mine to try and figure out what echoes of the past are still up in Inwood Hill Park. And Betty Lee took Cole and I up there. Betty Lee is a neighbor. Took Cole and I up there 5, 6, 7, I don't know, time goes by, to show us some old wells. She grew up in the neighborhood. So that's when we discovered some old wells. And that's when we realized there's really stuff there, because these wells are very deep. And so I'm always looking for foundations. And you can do that for a couple weeks in the spring and a couple weeks in the fall. So the whole unspooling of Inwood Hill as a story is something I'm also working on. That's exciting.
Well, I think so too, and I think it's also exciting that you've become part of that history.
No, I haven't.
I think so. I think so. I mean, it's to you're not aware of it, but you're a walking institution in Inwood, Don.
Huh.
That's you offer a great service for people, and I think again, providing people with the opportunity to experience things that perhaps surrounds them every day and make them a little more aware of their surroundings and
Yeah.
The enrichment that exists in this community and everyone who lives here is part of that evolution of that ongoing story. So
Yeah.
I think it's pretty impressive.
It's something I really think about a lot. How do we relate to the past? And when I say that, I mean not the things of the past, but the people. And how were they like us? And how were they like us? Or what would it have been like? That's sort of a limitation or the challenge of a museum like this. It's a thing. But why is it here? It's here because people were in it, and people built it, and people lived their lives here. But they're dead. And so the lifespan of a person is too short to really take you back to the founding fathers or before that or to the Lenape. There were people. Did they laugh? How did they joke? What were the jokes that they told? How were their relationships? In life. So how were they three-dimensional?
Yeah.
And so the real challenge, as I walk around and study this stuff, is how does this relate to the people like these wells or something? What was it? How did they affect their life?
Yeah.
And how is that a 3D thing that we can relate to today instead of an antique or a black and white photograph or something like that? How can it be in full color?
Yeah, that's what I hope these podcasts serve in some kind of way. And I can't even imagine what technology in 10 years will exist that will make recording on outdated now.
Yeah.
Let alone 50 years or 100 years when, I hate to say it, will all be gone. But it's true. And, they'll hear, wow, they were recording at Dyckman Farmhouse Museum and there were sirens outside and horns blaring and... Oh, didn't you know they moved Broadway a long time ago? Wait, Broadway was there? Yeah, Broadway was there. Can you believe Broadway was there?
Yeah.
And they moved Broadway to 10th Avenue. Well, and just like the old Kingsbridge Road was moved way, way, way back when, 100 years ago. So I'm curious what people will think of us here talking now in the oldest farmhouse in Manhattan with the technology that exists around us now, with this wonderful art installation that exists around us now, and the people who are trying desperately, like yourself and myself, to promote the local artists and local cultural heritage here in the neighborhood. And I'm very curious to see what affinity they might have for our time.
Yeah.
When they look back to us and what we're doing, and hearing the sirens and the fire engines and how loud Inwood is perhaps at the time, and going, wow, it's such a quiet neighborhood now. It was so loud back then. You never know.
You never know. I think that history can be forgotten. And so even if I'm doing a good job, it's good for one generation. And so one thing I've been thinking about is, especially related to the other people, I mean, we've know a lot about the Dyckman family, but Dyckman family were just the people whose name were on the deed here. There were a lot of other people living around here. And what were their lives like? And their lives were probably more like ours than the Dyckmans were like ours. People who worked. And so, if we can learn more about those people in schools, or if we can bring the other folks who worked, the laborers, the people who were enslaved, the people who were tenants, what were their lives like? Because that brings a better picture of what this whole Dyckman farmhouse means, because there's more than just the Dyckman family in the farmhouse. There's a world that it inhabited. And that, I think, becomes more, if you can communicate that to someone, say a 10-year-old coming on a tour, they might actually remember that for the rest of their lives.
Well, we can only hope.
Yeah.
Well, Don, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thanks again for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
You bet. Well, there's so much more we could talk about, and I feel like we can keep talking if we wanted to. But is there a place people might go to hire you if they're in need of a music copyist, or keep track of upcoming history projects? Anyone online?
I don't have a website. I'm like a plumber, word of mouth. But on Facebook, there is an Annex to Rice Music Service page, so you can go there. And Russ is that's what Russ has been updating every once in a while. I don't know if we've updated it lately. As far as history stuff goes, here right now in my function as president of the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum Alliance, there's stuff going on. At some point, I'm guessing a Lost Inwood will happen again somewhere. I don't know where or when or if, but I'm hoping. And I don't know. I'm not good at promoting myself, so.
That's okay. I'll do it for you.
All right. I'm good at working.
Well, that's all. Keep up the good work. So listeners, you can follow those links online where he said here at Dyckman Farmhouse Museum and on Facebook at Annex to Rice Music Services.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Don, for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really does help us. Many thanks to all here at Dyckman Farmhouse Museum in Inwood for hosting us, and to Heightsites.com for local uptown promotional support. Be sure to follow us on social media at Inwood Artworks to keep up with all that we do, including the Inwood Film Festival, Filmworks Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. You can support our programming and everything else we do by making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate. Inwood Artworks On Air is made possible with funding from the NYC & Company Foundation, with support from Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and the NYSCA Electronic Media and Film Grant Program in partnership with Wave Farm Media Arts Assistance Fund, and the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.
Thanks, Aaron. Go, Aaron.
Thanks, Don.